How are you again? Somebody asked me the other day about the Germanic idea of God. This is something I've wanted to talk about for a long time, and it's a very interesting topic because it kind of reveals mysteries about history and anomalies that were never really have much discussion about, like what is the Germanic nature of God as opposed to the Celtic nature of God and the Indo-European pagan version of God, and what this did to the Germanic psyche as that was replaced by with Christianity. Now that's my cat Benny in the background. He's looking for attention. He gets too much, but yes, you get too much. But yes, the idea again of God in the Germanic sense. Well, let's go back to the beginning. As you've seen on channels such as Survive the Jive, he showed how the further you go back in Celtic and Teutonic history, at some point they're both the same. They both come from the same root source, the same place. And there's no distinction between both. The Germanic spiritual traditions and the Celtic spiritual traditions, they seem almost identical, which isn't surprising really, considering they all come from the common Indo-European root. Now, if you look at the Roman historians' version of the wars against the Germanic and Teutonic tribes, they don't talk an awful lot about religion, really. They're classic propaganda texts, very similar to Julius Caesar's ones about the Gauls, basically dehumanizing them as pagan savages who have these barbaric, backward rituals, but they don't really go into any great detail. The Germanic idea of God seems to formulate out of the kind of Indo-European Celtic idea of the sacred tree. The sacred tree is common to both the Celtic tribes and to the Germanic tribes. You have the Immersal within the Germanic tradition, and then you have the Celtic trees, oracles, and so on. That lasted all the way into the modern. When I say modern, I mean like the Middle Ages and the Renaissance era of Gaelic society, in terms of the sacredness of trees and tree oracles and tree alphabets and so on, and within Ogham script. Now, there's a distinction there about the Germanic arrival of the idea of God as Wotan. Wotan, or Odin to the Scandinavians, Wotan to the Germanic Anglo-Saxons, and so on. Well, this is a very distinct form of God. It's monotheism plus, like he's not the only God, he's one of many, but he is the father of a pantheon of gods, similar to the classical concept of Jove or Zeus you have in Roman and Greek societies, pagan societies. The Germanic idea of God is very different than the Jehovah. He's a warlike God. He's a God of protection, a God of conquest, a God of violence, and even as well as a powerful father figure. And he's seen in the same sort of sense that a great warrior king would be seen, say, among the Jarls of the Scandinavian Viking world. His persona is very much that of don't mess with me, I'll tear you to bits, rather than punishing you because you don't believe him, like Jehovah. Now, there is a very interesting conspiratorial element to this as well. There's a video on my Beyond Room 313 channel on Karl Maria Wiligut. It's down. I'll put the link in the description box below. And there is a belief that the Christian version of Jesus Christ was altered specifically when it entered in from the classical pagan world of, say, Greece, Rome, Byzantium, North Africa, and into the Northern European world, that the early Christian monks, mostly were Irish and Scottish, by the way, arriving in places like the Odenswood in southern Germany, adapted the Christian story of Jesus Christ and the crucifixion to tie in with Odin hanging from the Yggdrasil tree. And Odin's or Wotan's sacrifice was seen as, for knowledge, was then transmuted into Jesus Christ's crucifixion for the redemption, the redeemer of the Western soul. Now, the likes of Carl Jung believed that there was a schism created with this, if this happened, and it probably did. But now there's people like Karl Maria Wiligut, and they really did believe, and the Völkisch movement really did believe that Jesus Christ was probably a completely different other story until the Christians entered into the Germanic world, and then they, rather than Christianized Wotan, they Wotanized Christ. And they, instead of Wotan being hung from the Yggdrasil tree for knowledge of the runes and inner enlightenment, that was replaced with Jesus Christ hanging on the cross for redemption and salvation of original sin, and the end of sacrifice. Now that's, you see, this is one of the real clues here. The King James Bible makes a very big deal that Jesus Christ represented the end of sacrifice. And all the usual Presbyterian groups like the Baptists and the Pentecostals and the Calvinists automatically jump and believe of the word sacrifice meant killing victims, virgins, children, animals, for the gods, to appease them. When in reality, when it meant no more sacrifice, it meant no more Odin. No more gods who would sacrifice themselves on behalf of gaining insight and wisdom that could then be put on top of the tribe or passed on to the tribe. And that's when they talk about no more sacrifice. Well, that comes directly from the Germanic world in Christianity, that there's no more Odin. There's no more. See, Odin self-sacrificed. They totally perverted the meaning of the term sacrifice to where you talk to the average like Christian today and they think that, well, pagan sacrifice meant killing animals, killing people in order to appease the sky gods or the earth gods or the thunder gods, the river gods. That went on only under exceptional circumstances, i.e. things were really bad, they needed a human sacrifice, and 99 times out of 100 it would be a captured prisoner from another army or a local paedophile or something like that. It would not have been just randomly picking up the best looking woman in the town and sacrificing her, because you need her DNA in order, and definitely not your best warriors, in order to continue the health of the tribe. Carl Jung believed that this transformation of Wotan into Christ, possibly as a result of this perversion of both original stories in order to make a new story, had damaged the Germanic soul. Their damage to Germanic psyche, to the point where it constantly looked for Freya Christus. Now, the Freya Christus is the Germanic version of the new Christ, the Christ who will save particularly the Germanic people, not the world as a whole. Now, the Freya Christus is obviously based on a corruption or a perversion of not letting them have Wotan and paganism back. That's what that comes from. So they twisted it, and that's when Hitler came to power. The Tula Society in the Intercontinental Hotel in Munich were obsessively looking for the Freya Christus. Now, there was a belief because of animism and Ariosophy that they were looking for a pagan god. They were not. They were looking for an undoing of the Christian myth of Christ and a restoration of the Wotan idea of the god and sacrifice. The Freya Christus, the new Christ, the future Christ, was not going to be someone from the Middle East, but going to be the return of a Wotan. But because there's been such domination by the Lutheran Church in Germany, particularly, there was still strong, even to the 20th century, there was still very strong memories of horrific persecutions of witches and massive witch burnings, entire populations wiped out by Lutheran Christians on looking for heretics, that it was, you couldn't come out in Germany, and even in the early 1900s or 20th century, and even say we need Wotan back. It was that the stigma was still there, that this is how dangerous the Lutheran Church was. It was still there, and that's where that comes from. I think there's a lot of truth to this, and it's a very believable thing that there is a very distinct. It's probably what made the distinction between the Celtic peoples which probably all German tribes were, and then the Teutonic tribes, which came out of that, the Teutonic tribes developed a whole different spiritual pantheon based upon the idea of Wotan and sacrifice of the god in order to attain enlightenment for the tribe. And that's probably why Lutheranism took off in mostly Protestant countries or previously Nordic spiritual countries. It was almost like a software hack on what had already kind of instinctually existed within people. So, yeah, the Teutonic tribes have a different notion of God, quite different than the other European tribes. And that's because there was a point in Germanic. It'd be fascinating to know what caused this or what made this happen. But there was a point in Germanic spiritual history where the idea of the Wotan, the Germanic god, really took root and probably created the German psyche that we know today, that is under the jurisdiction of a kind of a weird false hybrid. There's a huge history there that we don't fully know about. It's all been hidden, it's been damaged by even the Third Reich and everyone else. But there's something remarkably special about the Germanic idea of gods. And I'm not talking in a monotheistic sense, these were polytheistic pagans that had other gods too as well. That was unique to the Germans. And it's almost like there's times I do think that all of Christianity was hidden or was re-engineered in order to Christianize the pagan Teutonic tribes. And that's something that needs a lot more study and a lot more work in the time that I have. But it's the Sen, the Celtic tree, the Immersol, the crucifix. Now there's also the Germans unfortunately have their own version of British Israelism that try to dovetail the Hebrew characters into their own history, and they tried to make out that the Immersol tree, which looks just like the ovaries and go leading into the womb, the birth canal, is somehow a tree from the Middle East, a palm tree. And this is the kind of the same stuff done over and over again. The perversions of pagan culture is shocking. It's shocking, and this is why I have no time for these Christian types that are trying to revive it and believe that like the struggle for personal salvation and self autonomy and is to get to a more better translated version of the Bible. It's ridiculous. It has to end, and I think like this generation will be the one to draw the line under the sand and recapture or at least rebuild with whatever information we can find. There were a new paganism for Europe going forward. It absolutely terrifies the control system, and there's a bloody good reason for it, because it cannot be centralized in the same way that Christianity or Islam can be centralized. There is no one defining figure. There are just dominant agencies within each spiritual tradition that people can personally identify with, and that's what makes paganism so special, is that it carries with it a sense of individuality, in that like Hinduism you choose the god or goddess you want to worship, and that's because you relate to them and their struggle or their stories or their energy systems, energy forces within the concept, and the struggles and the feelings and the expectations of one's own life. And if that's not freedom, I don't know what is. Hail Odin.